Hi, long time no see. There's like two of you watching this, let's be honest here. And one of them's my husband, which, hi, I saw you very recently. Yeah. The entire almost second half of the year, I didn't post anything because life got really crazy. Not in a good way. So we're back. We're gonna start trying to do this again. Start doing this with some regularity again. So, hi, I'm Casey. This is I Don't Know What I'm Doing because I don't know what I'm doing. Anyways, we're gonna start where we started last year. These are my worst books of 2022. So the beginning of this list is a little bit, I don't know, tenuous or a lot less of a set numerical value on like the worst 10. The top 3, I believe, are my top 3 worst, like third, second, first. But these are all a little bit more kind of like wishy-washy on where I particularly feel like they land on this list on any particular day. So let's start. So the 10th book on this list, no, I'm gonna restart that because my bangs don't want to play nice today. The 10th book on this list is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This was an incredibly disappointing book for me. Overall, there were a lot of things about this book that made it just not work for me and honestly made it really kind of a bad book in my opinion. Overall, the book just dealt with a lot of flat characters. There were themes and questions that the author and that the narrative posed that I think had no time for genuine exploration. And the plot was just honestly full of such lackluster twists and reveals, and it was overall so outlandish and over the top that I was completely out of it, and I could have gotten along with a lot of the things if the characters had just been more engaging and less two-dimensional. I found so many of the characters to basically just boil down to the essential trope that they were trying to convey. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing, I wanted them to have more layers and I wanted them to be more nuanced and I wanted them to explore more of what makes final girls really engaging and honestly what would make them in real life really scary and really compelling and would make them such figureheads in pop culture. But there was just none of that and it just kind of devolved into, it wasn't even like B-movie plot nonsense. It was just so over the top. It was nonsensical. It was just, I hated it. I did not have a good time reading this. The next book on this list is Ring by Koji Suzuki. Overall, this just wasn't creepy enough. It wasn't scary enough. There were only a couple of scenes that did kind of have me on the edge of my seat. And, you know, for such a historied, you know, movie and American adaptation, it just fell really flat. There were some really big mishandlings of characters in here. Ryuji in here is just very disappointing overall. He just was so flat and so, I don't know, just cartoonishly villainous at times, but then at the end it tried to come in and make him seem like he was actually a good guy the whole time, and that was very disappointing to me. There's also the grievous mishandling of Sadako being intersex in here, and the way it is truly just villainized and only serves to make her seem like less of a fucking person. And it's just, it was really gross. It was really uncomfortable to read. It was really difficult to read. And I understand it's published a very long time ago. That does not change the fact that it is bad. It's bad representation and it is just grossly mishandled. And so that's why it's on this list. The next one on this list is The Ritual by Adam Neville. This unfortunately had, it was okay. It was okay for about 60% of it. I was listening to this while I was cleaning the house one day, and the first 60% really did have me creeped out for a while. And as we were getting closer to that 60% mark, which how many times can I say 60% in this video? A lot. As we got closer to that mark, it just felt like the story was wrapping up. Everything was ending, and I had no idea how we were going to have almost an entire, you know, how we still had so much of this left. And it's because the second half feels like a completely separate book. It's so strange how it goes from like really creepy folk monster horror to hillbilly horror with like very, very little setup. It was very unfortunate. And as I said, the first half or a little over half was at least entertaining enough to keep me invested in it. But there's also a shitload of misogyny and fat phobia and just general nastiness from this group of men in here. And it's fine because that's who the characters are, but it's also just incredibly uncomfortable to read, and I don't think anything in the book serves to correct that course or to criticize that. It just feels like a blatant acceptance that this is who these men are, and I always kind of want those themes and that general unpleasantness to have something to push up against it a little bit, just to show that the author is aware of it and knows what's going on and is not condoning it. So it's my own personal gripe with it, but that's why it's on this list. The next book I have is Cabal by Clive Barker. Unfortunately for me, this just was overall such a big miss. I found Laurie, the love interest slash main character for the most part, kind of sort of with Boone, to just be super annoying, and it's really unfortunate because as a character she's poorly written and she's just a piss poor audience surrogate. She feels like she's stupid because that's how, like, I don't know why she is so just woefully unengaged with the world, but as an audience surrogate it makes it really frustrating whenever you've figured out a twist or a reveal and we get to it and she's just pushing back against it so hard, and you're like, no, this is clearly what's happening, and she's just really frustrating to read. Part of the reason why I think she's poorly written is because I'm not sure that, Mr. Barker here knew how to write women at this time. I haven't read enough of his work that I don't know if he still doesn't know how to write women. But it's really uncomfortable to read and just really unfortunate. This is also paired with the fact that there's just a lot of uncomfortableness surrounding like women's sexuality or, specifically Laurie's genitalia. It's whenever we are talking about, a penis or a boner or whatever, it's really talked about with almost kind of this poetic prose, and it's kind of romanticized to an extent, but whenever we're talking about, a vagina, it's just a cunt. And it was very uncomfortable to read, and I found the story really lackluster. The characters were really just bleh. Yeah. The next book on this list is Where They Wait by Scott Carson. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I read this because it was on the Goodreads Best of Horror list for 2021. And this is just another instance of it was so over the top for me that it just completely lost me. I don't know how we go from, this is a spoiler by the way, I don't know how we go from a sleep and meditation app to ghost pirates. It didn't make sense to me at the time. It doesn't make sense to me now. I didn't enjoy it at all. I occasionally take notes whenever I'm reading something, especially like for audiobooks. And the only note I had for this was, why the fuck in 2021 are we using schizophrenic as an adjective? It was when a character was looking at a painting and he just talked about it as schizophrenic. And it was just like, what in the ever-living fuck? Why are we in 2021 using that as a descriptor? It was nasty and I hated it. It is truly one of the few things that stood out to me in this book, in just a complete mess of uninteresting and unappealing prose. This helped. The one thing I will say about this book is this, with a couple other books that I attempted to read this year and I read previous years, this is solidifying for me that horror / mystery thrillers are not for me in any way, shape, or form. This one didn't even do the thing that normally happens for me, where I'm at least interested for maybe 80% of it, and I just completely peter out by the last part of it. I'm bored and I don't care, and I don't find the mystery engaging anymore. And this for me had none of that. I wasn't interested in the beginning, I wasn't interested by the end, and it was so over the top and like, I don't want to say it was overwritten, but the plot was just so overworked. There was too much going on. This also had, for me, a really, again, this is going to be a theme for these worst books of 2022. It was a theme in my worst books of 2021. I think the main female love interest character was so fucking poorly written. She had some interests and ideas of her own, but at the end of the day, her only purpose as a character was to get our protagonist from one place to another. And again, another spoiler for this one, the only reason her character seemingly dies is to move his plot forward, and it was very infuriating. It was a ride and not one I wanted to be on. The next book I have on this list is The Penelope Ad by Margaret Atwood. Overall in this one, it just really felt so completely lackluster. One of the things that I enjoy when I read Atwood's work is I find her characters really compelling, and I find that she usually writes characters really well. And this was just, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, it was just kind of bullshit. Penelope herself was just sort of this, I don't want to say vile, but she was just so miserable and unhappy and really took no agency in her own story, which is fine. It's something I typically like in books, but it was very frustrating to read. And this is also, Penelope telling her story with little poems or vignettes, or like sometimes it was almost what do you call them? Screenplays of certain things told by the handmaids of hers that were killed when Odysseus came back. And they felt so thrown in, and at the time of reading it, they felt more interesting than Penelope telling her story, because she was I don't know, how do you talk about something like this that was just so frustrating to read? Because Penelope, who I wanted to have agency, and when she took it, she just never did anything with it, and never challenged anything. And I think overall it was just really frustrating to read. And again, the biggest takeaway from it was we spent so much of Penelope's time hating on Helen of Troy, calling her a bitch and a cow, and saying how nasty she was and narcissistic she was and vain. And it was just so disappointing. I just wanted more from this one, and calling it a feminist retelling was just such a gross misunderstanding of what was actually happening in that book. We're going to get rantier as we go on, by the way, because there are some books in here that I could rant about for hours. The next book on this list is We Need to Do Something by Max Booth III. It's the fart jokes for me. It's the fart jokes, it's the toilet humor, it's the continuous use of a little 9-year-old kid only as a vessel for really nasty, gross humor. Now, that being said, I understand that the entirety of this book takes place with a family, literally enclosed in a bathroom. So there's going to be toilet humor and there's going to be some nastiness, but it was just, I wanted what was happening to gross me out, not the little brother to constantly be talking about he farted or his sister farted, which by the way, I'm just now remembering this. It was pointed out to me once before that a lot of times people with siblings don't actually, talk to their sibling in a way that's like, oh, hey bro, or hey sis. And this book just constantly had that. It was constantly sissy this or little bro that, and it really started to grate on my nerves. And it's such a short novella that there was not a lot of room for it to do that and still tell the story it wanted. Overall, the plot for this was fine. That's not what really turned me off from this book. It was too boring, and the characters were too uninteresting to make up for just me honestly having to spend a week trying to read this 100-page fucking novella because it was just grossing me out, and not in a way I found enjoyable. Okay, we are on to our last 3 books. These are in order, and so the third worst book I read this year was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I would be really remiss to not include this in this video. It is technically a DNF because I DNF'd it at 86% or something like that. But I read enough of it, I counted it, I had strong enough feelings, so it's making it to this list. Is this beautifully written? Yes, it is beautifully written. Are there a lot of people that love it and swear by this book and call it their favorite book of all time? Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe it's me. Maybe I don't get it. Maybe I'm not the audience. Maybe there's something in me that just doesn't work with this book. But this is pure fucking misery porn. It is a continuous punching of a character over and 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 over for almost 900 pages. It gets to the point where it becomes cartoonish. And this is talking about hellish things that people in real life endure and have to live through their entire lives with. And I do not think at any point in time I should have found what was happening to Jude to just be silly, and for it to have felt like, well, of course we have to add this to the list, and for me to roll my eyes while reading some of this. It is a mishandling on these topics, in my opinion. These are all my opinions. By the way, I'm going to say some pretty strong things about this, but they are just truly my opinions. For the first third of this book, there truly is a sense of balance to it. While there is pain and there's degradation and there is humiliation and there is hurt, there's also a sense of family and camaraderie and hope. And before anyone says anything in the comments, which I don't know that anyone is, because because no one's fucking watching this, but I realized that Yanagihara's mission with this was to basically make an ombre effect in a book. And so it was supposed to go from like a vaguish, like barely gray to like pitch black. I understand that, but it's misery porn. And I feel like you have to have balance to make the hard things worthwhile and to make them impactful. Because at one point I'm sitting here and I'm reading this and I'm just going, okay, and I'm rolling my eyes at heinous, vile, evil things because it feels cartoonish, and it's fucking irresponsible. I'm sorry. I feel like this is just irresponsible in fiction. I feel like it takes a lot of hard topics, and instead of having nuance or balance to it, it just piles it all on top of each other, and it just makes it so I don't have a word for just truly how like nasty my feelings are about this. I've seen some reviews call this a melodrama, and in a sense I understand, but there's a lot of it that isn't. The abuse and the harm that Jude suffers throughout his entire life is not melodrama. The lifelong physical and mental consequences of that abuse, not melodrama at all. Jude's internal struggle to feel worthy his entire life is not melodrama. The inability of all the other characters to communicate, not only with each other, but also with Jude, is absolutely melodrama and absolutely just used as a device to further Jude's pain. The antics of so many people in Jude's life in regards to his decision and his agency is melodrama. The absolute cowardice and abuse that Willem inflicts on Jude as the book goes on, and specifically in the happy years, is purely melodrama. And I do want to say, again, this is another spoiler, this was the point where the book completely lost me. I had been going along with it. I had a lot of strong feelings about it. I knew I was not having, not even a good time, but I was just kind of exhausted by this book. I felt like, and not in like the I'm crying, I'm having a strong reaction to it. I felt just like it was doing too much. This was it. This was it. The inability for Willem to even begin to have conversations with Jude about their relationship and their boundaries, and his inability to fucking pay attention and to see what he was doing was hurting Jude. It sent me over the edge. It sent me over the edge, and I was done with it, and I was trying to just finish it as quickly as I could. And I got to the end of the happy years, and I said, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I also would be very remiss. I don't know if I talked about this whenever I talked about the DNF this book earlier last year, but I would be incredibly remiss if I didn't mention the fact that this author also has some extremely complicated and, in my opinion, problematic views about traditional talk therapy, and how this author feels like it's not for anyone. And I, as a person who is currently in therapy and going through all of this, it's an incredibly valuable resource to so many people. I do want to say, maybe this is me. This might just be me and this book, and there's a disconnect there because I know so many people love it and they see incredible value in it. I found it to be incredibly harmful, and these are just my opinions. On to a little bit more of a fun book, and ranty, but in a more fun way, not in a more serious way. The second book on this list is Brand New Cherry Flavor by Todd Grimson. I picked this up as an audiobook from my library because I wanted to watch the Netflix show, and I wanted to read the book first. And holy shit, is this just a kitchen sink of mess. It is everything thrown into one, and none of it is good. Let me tick off the list on my phone here of things that I put. Misogyny, transphobia, toxic masculinity, xenophobia, broad and constant stereotyping, bad writing, offensive language, and an all-over-the-place plot. This book had it all. Also reveled in it in a way that I think it was almost trying to mock a lot of these topics and a lot of these things that it was doing, but it just completely went over the edge, and just instead of like showcasing it and mocking it, it kind of reveled in its own excuse to use these things. It was a mess. It made no attempt to deconstruct any of these things or to talk about them in a in any sort of, conversational progressive way. It only like brought them in, I think, to just revel in its own excesses. It was just a mess. This is on top of so much of what happens to poor little Lisa Nova in this book is not only over the top, but it's also counterpointed by just sprawling paragraphs of talking about what she's eating and what she's wearing for seemingly no reason. It's not like American Psycho levels of satirization. It just felt like we just needed to talk about what Lisa was wearing for a really long time and what she was eating for no real reason that I could discern. At some point in time, this book just completely loses its plot to B-movie sex, violence, and gore. And normally those aren't things that I would complain about or I would find to be, frustrating in a book. But it just becomes so excessive, and there's nothing to counterbalance it, and it just completely loses its narrative. At least while Boro is around, there is some sense of progress in the plot. It's not always forward momentum, sometimes it's lateral movements, but at least there's a sense that the plot is moving forward. And then we lose Boro 50% of the way through, and then it just meanders for another several hours of uninteresting nonsense that's just overall really boring. I do think that to an extent the author was trying to use a lot of the things in this book and a lot of the plot and narrative devices to shine a light on the vapidity and shallowness in Hollywood and of fame in general. And it's just not really successful. It just at some point in time feels like it's not so much shining a lens on it as it is reveling in these sorts of these sorts of ideas. Overall, this book was just such a mess, and it was not even a fun one. Okay, my friends, my people, we're on to the worst book I read in 2022. This was one of the earliest books I read in the year. I have a full video dedicated to talking about it and why I hated it, and it was How Literature Saved My Life by David Shields. This book was awful. I really went back and forth for a really long time this year trying to figure out which was worse, Brand New Cherry Flavor or How Literature Saved My Life. And ultimately, I'm going to put How Literature Saved My Life as worse because I think it masquerades more as something that is helpful rather than, you know, Brand New Cherry Flavor just being fiction and just excessive and over the top. But How Literature Saved My Life does try to, in my opinion, masquerade as something that is helpful and can inspire someone else to find their purpose in life. All the reasons I hated this, I hated the writing, I hate the writing style. At this point in time, I can't remember specifically what it's called, but David Shields employs a very specific style of writing. I think something comparable to David Foster Wallace Foster, one of those, the guy who wrote Infinite Jest. And I hated it. It's not for me, and that's fine. That's not a criticism of the style, that it just doesn't work for me, but it did make this book quite a slog to get through. There was also so much just meandering from topic to topic, and I think if you're going to say that this chapter is dedicated to these ideas, maybe you should stick to those ideas. Maybe you shouldn't just kind of include weird sex stories. I don't know, maybe I'm a prude. This was incredibly tedious to read. It was very frustrating to read so much of the time. And the things that were very frustrating were the misogyny, the author's inability to recognize his wife or daughter as their own person, but merely as a vessel to look at himself through. And the just absolute bizarre, weird fixation on Tiger Woods having a very public shame event and him having his affairs brought out in public, and the way that this author reveled in Woods's public humiliation was just uncomfortable. It felt very racially charged, and it was very, I didn't enjoy reading it. It was really nasty. This is also coupled with, at the end of the book, him almost making fun of Toni Morrison for feeling snubbed at the National Book Awards, the year that Beloved came out, and then she went on to win, I believe, a Nobel Peace Prize for it, or Nobel Prize for it, probably not Peace Prize, whatever. You're not here for accuracy, you're here for me to rant. And it was weird. It was weird, it felt weird, it felt really insensitive, and just, it just felt like this author really lacked awareness, not only in those instances, but throughout the entire book. Then you go on to find out that he's also written some other really weird things about basketball teams and has portrayed, you know, people of color in other strange ways. So all that. Anyways, if you made it to the end of this, those are the 10 worst books I read in 2022. I will see you hopefully next week. Fingers crossed. We're going to see. That's the goal, at least. Okay. I hope you have a wonderful day, and bye.